The fallen leaves tell a story. Cross the fog to the lands between. A tarnished of no renown.
Anna Ellsworth, Master of the Strings. The Controller Alchemist, Sergeant Taco. And CZR, King of the Speed Drums.
To stand before the Elden Ring and become the Elden Lord.
I thought it'd be the coolest thing in the world if I played Elden Ring with my saxophone. So on February 25th, when the game came out and all of us excited gamers ran to it, I picked up my saxophone and I said to myself, I'm gonna beat this game. On August 14th, I finally did that. And let me tell you, it was one of the most rewarding and frustrating experiences of my life, but I think some of the coolest things have come out of it, and I wanted to share that with everyone. Today, I'm going to be talking about how to design an unconventional controller, the musicality behind instrumental gaming, and how this all fits together under the umbrella of a new musical theater.
I would start with what are your expected inputs and what are your expected outputs. So the outputs most likely are mappings to the controller, so all your controller buttons. Your inputs are what is every possible thing you can get out of the saxophone. So that's the velocity, or how much breath you're putting into it, specific combinations.
That was Sergeant Taco, a programmer who specializes in unconventional controller design. He does both the programming and the physical aspects of the controllers, allowing for full control over how the controller ends up. Because of this, he's able to take each application of a new aspect of a controller, such as using heat temperature to make bowls of water register your finger, or the fact that an onion has layers to register when it's being pressed down based on how much the onion is compressing. Looking at this project was the first time that I ever had to think about how a controller was actually designed and what went into both the physical aspect of a controller and the assignment of input. It's a question of, are you breaking down the instrument in a physical manner or in a musical manner? During my playthrough of Elden Ring, I had two inputs, or two controller layouts, where the first one, I was still learning how all of this worked and getting comfortable with the whole process. Instead of focusing on how to make this a musical experiment, I strictly made it, how can I make this feel good as a controller in my hands? Elden Ring requires of us, as a player, the ability to maneuver, fight, and the user interface for us to interact with, mainly items and inventory. Using this as our key, we can now begin to examine exactly how I designed these saxophone controllers and what my thought process was when I was designing my first one. I decided to keep combat in my right hand and movement in my left hand. This diagram for non-musicians is probably a little bit challenging to read, so let me help you out. Where it says D, E, F, and F sharp, those are all notes that change in my right hand. I have to hold down all three keys, or the three primary keys in my left hand, meaning that the change is occurring in my right hand. Whereas if you look at, or lower on the chart, G, A, B, and C, the bulk of my movement keys in my left hand, where it is just my three left hand fingers moving around and maneuvering in order to move the character. So controllers have the triggers, and they're at the top of the, if you're looking at it up and down, you have the top of your controller, and those are your triggers. You've got your joysticks, and you've got your directional buttons, and your A, B, X, Y for Nintendo and Xbox, and your 6 shapes for PlayStation. But everything is sectioned off. You have typically jump and combat are together. Movement is on the left hand, so you can move, jump, move, combat. And your triggers are, depending on what game you're playing, either buffs or another aspect of combat. So instead of sectioning it on top, down, left, right, I just stuck to left and right, and then used the in-between keys as my triggers or as my directional pads, which in a game like Elden Ring change very little about the game. being able to edit the controller and do pretty much anything I want with it is, I think, the biggest part of what makes this so doable. As you're thinking about it that way, you have to kind of ask, are you thinking about a regular controller that way? Like, are you thinking about how, because your left joystick is your movement and your right stick is your camera, how those are interacting? Like, I don't think it ever really crossed my mind that at any point controller A is functioning a specific way, so much as it's just like what made sense first. The key to success in Elden Ring is timing, as you have explicit windows to execute actions. Dodging allows you to increase or decrease the distance from your opponent, all while avoiding damage. Healing offers a risk reward, as it allows you to recover lost health but leaves you vulnerable to attack. Attacking requires the reaction time of dodging, but with the addition of well-placed strikes. And parrying has the most limited window of all, as it stops your opponent's attacks and lets you execute one of your own, largely risk-free. While battling, maneuvering is difficult, because it forces you to lock on and become dependent on the movement of your enemy. With a traditional controller, this isn't necessarily an issue, as you can act independently from your opponent. However, with an instrumental controller, it creates a dynamic between you and the opponent that doesn't generally exist in normal gameplay. A codependent one.
I'm using Magic with harp. Obviously, like it's not like automatically MIDI what gets output, and so basically that just turns like the harp notes into MIDI. Then I can work with foam MIDI translator, which I think is what you use as well, right?
Yes, correct. This is Anna Ellsworth, a classical and contemporary orchestral musician who is just joining us in the field of video game musical performance. She's a Twitch streamer who also uploads musical performances and her gameplay to her YouTube channel. You guys should go check that out after this video. I actually have access to both Anna and CZR's BOEM scripts, so I had the pleasure of comparing their scripts to my scripts. We have, all three of us, thought about it so differently from each other. I took what I wanted each note to be doing and copy and pasted that up an octave or two and down an octave or two, with each octave having a slight variation. So because I'm playing a MIDI saxophone, I am able to have, I think, up to 127 inputs. That's a way more inputs than I need. When you're looking at how to design the controller, you're thinking, okay, I know that I want my F note to be shield, but you can move and hold the shield at the same time in Elden Ring. So when I go down an octave and I'm trying to move forward and I play C on controller A, it also produces the shield up animation.
Okay, so with Magic, it's originally for guitar. So I only have a kind of like a range that a guitar can work with. I was kind of testing things out with like the really low end of the harp, but it just wasn't detecting it. Same with like the really high end. So I think right now, I would say my range, let me see, lowest note is here, 2, 3. I think it spans about 3 octaves, what I'm doing, but it's only C major, so I don't have any sharps or flats in there. I could add them if I wanted to, but it does complicate some things with the harp specifically.
Anna, because she is using an acoustic harp, she can't do 2 notes at the same time like a harp regularly could as a harmonic instrument. So with this new limitation of being a monophonic instrument limited to 1 note, she can only, her and I are the same in that we can only do one thing at a time. However, the velocity trigger in my EWI registers when I stop playing a note, which is amazing. But the room that Anna is in doesn't stop the note from ringing in the acoustic harp based on how sound travels. So what she does is she triggers a note and then either palm mutes it to stop, or she also in her script has when I play C, I move forward, and when I play D, I move left. But in the script it says when I play D, stop playing C, E, and F. So there is a built-in, when this note is produced, stop all other animations, and that is the case for almost all of her inputs. So she has quadruple the inputs that she needs because she needs to be able to stop an action to start a new one, especially with movement.
Recently, though, I made an update to the controllers that did make the playing even more restrictive. And what I mean by that is now if I hit a drum really hard, it will toggle that direction. If you know the range of MIDI velocity notes, it's 0 to 127. So from 0 to 18, if I hit that soft, Mario will move very slow, like the joystick will be barely moved off center. 18 to 26 is normal movement, all the way joystick, and I can just roll, and it's not toggled. So if I hit, then Mario just moves a little bit, and then he stops completely. But if I whack it at 127, that direction is toggled. So now I have to be wary of my dynamics. Whereas before, it was just really soft and then everything else. Now there's 3 different layers of that. So I've had to like control my velocities or watch my velocities that much more when I'm speedrunning to make sure I'm not toggling anything I'm not supposed to.
So CZR speedruns video games on his drum set, which is actually one of the reasons that I started doing what I'm doing here today. I watched some of his videos and eventually a tutorial on how he set everything up, and I thought to myself, I could do this. Velocity is not only the pinnacle of how we can elaborate on these controllers and make them do more with limited resources on controller inputs, it is also the basis for defining and developing musicality. Velocity, at the end of the day, is just volume control. So when you're thinking about how a piece can be quiet and how we can grow the dynamics to create a much more dramatic and in-your-face piece, or how we can come back from that and say, you know, it is okay to be quiet. I plan on showing what the musicality looked like as far as Controller B and how I picked chords and tonalities and put them together here in just a moment. But I do want to take a second to look at the visualized controller layout of Controller B so that we can look at some of the differences between Controller A and Controller B. Here we can see that combat and movement are much more intertwined, or a lot more alternating. I did this because when looking at how music is written, there is a lot of back and forth between tension and release. There is a form of stability that a musician or a composer is keeping in mind when they're writing. It is this relationship between notes that was able to help define and really develop the controller as an instrument again versus just a piece of plastic controlling a game. I based my combat off of A flat dominant 7th. I used D minor add 4 in second inversion for my movement. And for the UI, I just stuck to B flat and B natural. Oftentimes when thinking about music theory and tertiary harmony, you're thinking about how we can get things to stack in thirds. That's what I was trying to do here in the combat in a way that felt natural. And while these chords don't sound great together when blocked off, they sound great together when you're switching back and forth. For example, when I'm in combat and I want to utilize a light attack, I play B to lock on, A to maneuver forward, C to do my light attack, and then I grace note from E into F to roll to my left. Now, that's what's happening in the game, but what's happening in the musical context is I've actually just outlined a F major chord in first inversion. Experimenting with other ways to make this experience musical, I ended up getting a foot pedal, so something that I set up on my feet where I would run my 1/4-inch cable through and it would apply effects. And so there's a few boss fights where when I'm soloing over the cutscenes, I'm using different effects to achieve different musical outcomes or tones, like tonal genres. Applied through boss fights, I started to play around with looper features, where I would incorporate like bass tones and different flourishes that it was almost like my soundtrack, my boss music kicked in, and when I was in a boss fight, it was like two ensembles getting together and duking it out while their like conductors were actually physically fighting. That's how I thought about it anyway. When watching Godric do that little thing where he pulls his axe back and he twirls and he jumps up, I know he's about to land. I mean, I know the rough timing because I've fought him for 6 hours straight, but he also shows it to me by where his shadow is. That's a visual cue. In the same way that if I'm on an actual stage with a jazz musician and he is finishing his solo on his trumpet, he's going nuts, he finishes and he just points at me, it's a visual cue for me to start. Why would I treat those two any differently? If I don't start playing, the trumpet player is going to land on me and do that massive axe attack just fucking off me. That's the kind of life-threatening danger I'm in every gig. Did you know that Godric the Crafted is actually a beautiful jazz musician? Featuring on the trumpet in this track.
That's right.
Beautiful.
When you put it that way, there is such a clear, like, connection between those things of, like, live performance versus rehearsed, like, I mean, it's like the difference between YouTube and Twitch.
Yeah, I mean, and both are valid performances. I mean, like looking at what content consumption is today, and taking something. I love the comparison that you just made of Twitch and YouTube, where there is an element of improvisation in YouTube videos, but there is also the benefit of being able to go through and edit and design your performance in a way that you want it to be seen. Whereas with Twitch streaming, there's no second chance. Time is always moving forward, and whatever happens, happens. It is the exact same thing in something like improvised music versus rehearsed music, where in improvised music, there is an element of, okay, you know what to expect, like the way that a Twitch streamer starts playing a scary game, knowing they're probably going to get scared. A jazz musician about to play a solo probably knows there's going to be 2-5-1 in their progression. So when you're taking both of those things into account, you're recognizing, okay, this isn't the jazz musician's first rodeo. They know mainly what to expect, but what they're going to do for me on this stage right now is give me a performance that none of us have ever seen before, in a way that any of us have ever seen before. Whereas the rehearsed element, the YouTube element, where you can take something and edit it and get it perfect and pristine and ship it out, that to me is a composition. Or when bands go into a recording studio and they say, we've got this song, we wrote it, we practiced it, we run it down. I mean, even your favorite, pop song that you are listening to every day has been cut down from its best parts and recollected and made into the perfect soundtrack or whatever you want to view it as.
Felt like I was learning a lick, like I was learning a song, and because it's about timed inputs, about specific sequences of hits, it's like I was learning a song. So that's when it clicked in my head, like, this is actually not that hard. And I went full out in 2 weeks. I was going ham on practicing and trying to answer if I could do all the speedrunning strats. And once I did, I started doing attempts of speedrunning Ocarina of Time, and then the rest is history. That's how it all started.
I've been talking about the idea that as we perform music, we're actively beating games. Now, in this clip of CZR speedrunning, he is playing a drum solo that is actively beating Mario 64. What's really interesting about this is that he's practiced and rehearsed this run prior to this timed run. Now, he was giving those as live stream Twitch performances, so there is an aspect of performance that is always happening when he is Twitch streaming. But because it is not the new record run, I wouldn't categorize it as the performance. I would say it's a performance, or like practicing in front of everybody, but not necessarily a showcase performance. And I want to take a moment to clarify that it doesn't really matter what I think it is, because it is what CZR says it is. Now, all I mean by that is, at the end of the day, it is what we make of it and how we decide to define this process. I really want to make it clear that this essay isn't about answering the question. It's about asking the question. What makes this a performance, and what kind of performance is it?
And I've released a couple videos where you just hear the drumming, and it sounds very random, very like someone's just doing random things. But the way I like to frame it is, this drum solo beats Super Mario 64.
I absolutely love CZR's take here. I think that presenting the information in a way that is this piece of music beat this video game is wonderful. But I also love the framing of this video game helped me create this music. When I make a decision in Elden Ring and I'm walking around the world, I'm outputting my information into this new context. And every time the game presents to me something new, whether it's a new area, a new enemy, some sort of new challenge or puzzle, I think that is now defining the world in a new and way more exciting way that now I get to explore musically. So as I explore the world, I access more of it, and as the world offers more to me, it expands the musical vocabulary and the musical motifs used to create this. The really cool thing about the silent film era is that there were classical pieces that were performed over silent movies, and it was just kind of a thing of like, hey, I want Beethoven's Fifth over, or 30-second piano sonata over this. And you're like, great, I'll learn it, I'll be there Tuesday, whatever. More often than not, they would be like, hey, we've got this new moving picture, want to play over it right now? The film starts in 5 minutes, and like the pianist is just like, fuck it, that's a job. And so they would go and they would improvise over the film more often than not the first time they saw the film. And it was just a collection of like, okay, well, when it's suspenseful, just go to this chord, you can kind of build this way. And when you're comfortable enough on an instrument, especially a piano, you're not looking at it. You've moved past having to see where your hands are for the most part. So they just had their heads turned watching the film, and they were going nuts on the keys, and everyone loved it.
Like, so that is like, reloading a save, trying it again. I feel like it's a very like musician thing to do, is always like trying to get like a better take and feeling like, I can do this better, and wanting to put like a finished product out there that you feel is really polished.
So the other thing I found was, let's say you take that minimum approach, so you have your 18 buttons assigned and you assign nothing else. Might work with saxophone, I don't know. I just know keyboard, it works because, so let's say you're playing piano, each hand can do very different things. So what you can do is get used to playing the game with just your right hand, so all your buttons are all around there, and with your left hand, you can just straight up play any kind of music. So it's not playing the game to a melody type thing, it's playing a melody while randomly having game inputs from your other hand. So that sounds good, and I've done it, but it's rough. And it sort of feels like cheating because it's more like, hey, I'm just playing music with having random like tip taps or whatever thrown in. Because ultimately with like these music controllers, I'd like to have some sort of song actually playing to be like, hey, I beat Dark Souls playing, let's say, Moonlight Sonata or something.
I had a comment.
Controller, I haven't done it with anything. It was my first time on Friday, and I was so nervous for it. I feel like what I'm used to is, I get a piece of music, I can look at it, I can practice it, I know exactly what it is, and if it's a solo, like I know that this is what I'm going to play. Like there's not going to be any kind of like variation.
Just ponder that for a minute. Just ponder. Right. We're pondering. We've been pondering for a minute now that I'm the primary protagonist of this musical, Elden Ring, the musical. And every boss that I come across is a secondary performer when I'm in their arena. As I'm the protagonist, I present my musical motifs, my information, and as I interact with them, they're showing me how they want to fight. It is up to me to watch, observe, and fight on their terms. I think that whole structure if you were to design a musical around that, let's say you cut it down to 3 bosses and you had 3 acts where each boss had a different important way to fight, and each time the protagonist had to learn that new way and it helped them grow, and it's a great story and everyone's clapping at the end. It's fucking fantastic. I think if we did that with Elden Ring, the only difference is that there's not 3 bosses. There's more than 3 bosses. Otherwise, it's beat for beat. That's exactly what I'm doing. I'm just taking what they want to be happening. They're projecting their movement. Their soundtracks are often tied to their movements. I can't listen to them very well because as I'm playing, I am hearing my saxophone. And it's usually louder than the game for me. But with that being said, if I was listening to their music, it'd be a secondary feature. Their soundtrack is telling me what they want. That is aiding the fight. But as I am using my soundtrack to control the fight, that is what determines this as a musical. I want to apply this line of thought to a few different things. I think that if we can think about this as a musical, then we can begin to look at storytelling and musical motifs as musicals do. I also think that, in general, that opens up a lot more possibilities. I talked about speedrunning earlier and the idea of rehearsed performance. I mean, what if we took music and wrote a composition to it that actually beats a game? Something that is written, that you can practice, that when you sit down, achieves the goal of beating the game. And what if we continue to develop improvisational techniques and close the distance between how much of the instrument is functional as an instrument while playing a game to create beautiful music? And I mean, you could even take the video out and the music should still sound good. That's the point that I want to get to.
So I think there is that's kind of like where I'm at right now, but of course I would love to incorporate more musicality into my speedruns. Now, the other way this question has been framed is through tasks. Because imagine the task scripts are just predetermined button presses with predetermined timings as well. And, with drumming, getting the same star, for example, in Super Mario 64, it will never be exactly the same. It's actually really, really hard to get the exact same hits, the exact same timing, the exact same velocity, which is each of those hits. But that wouldn't be a problem with tasking. So imagine we created a task to get a star in Super Mario 64, and we tie those inputs to an instrument or to a note or to a set of instruments. I think that's a really interesting idea, and we might get some interesting pieces of music coming out of that. So yeah, I love that idea, and I think there's several of us trying to figure how we can do that in a not just meaningful way, but in a way that creates something new. Because right now it's still very random. So not like if you just listen to the instruments, they sound random.
Tasking is speedrunning where a computer has broken down each specific moment down to the exact frame where an input needs to happen. This exact specialized timing is not something that the human brain is really capable of mimicking. While speedrunning does require rehearsed performance and elements of mastery, it cannot be done to the point of tasking. Until now, I believe that composed speedrun could actually be one of the closest things we can get to tasking with human elements, or with fully human elements. The performance of a rehearsed piece of music is timed out down to the exact second, down to the exact millisecond with subdivision. Because speedrunners, as far as I understand, aren't subdividing, being able to feel the pulse between every single beat or every single unit of measurement, every single second, they're not able to perform the task as they're not learning it the way that a musician learns music. If we can change this approach, I believe it is possible to get so much more precise with our speedrunning to the point where we can reach refined levels close to or on par with taskers. I just have to say that there's a lot of really exciting things to chew on here. And while a lot of the ideas presented today are big stretches or might seem like big leaps, there's actually a lot going on that when you break it down to its key components of music is a time-based medium, and so is video games when you think about the way that we interact with them. So why can't we combine them? And it's evident that people have started doing that. CZR, Anna Ellsworth, Sergeant Taco, myself, and many other people have begun to work on this. And I've been so eager to define it that I spent the last couple of months working on this thesis and developing this essay, but I think what's more important is that we're defining this as a group. I want to try and get as many people together and work towards what we might be able to achieve as one large community.
I love talking about this. I love sharing it. I want to find ways to learn as much as possible and share everything I know. Because I have run into people where their whole thing is like, oh, how can we monetize this? How can we like make money out of this? It's like, no, that's not the point of any of this. The point is finding ways to make this possible for people who it's impossible for right at this moment. And so finding someone like you or Anna or people, it helps along the way. And then if there was a whole community for this, that would be incredible. Like a community for sharing solutions and so on.
Yeah.
Or music and yeah.
I think there's something, we're all getting to something similar here, which is like your own personal approach to gaming, your own personal creative answer to something people were not even asking, but you want to define it, right? And that's what I'm saying. Maybe they were thinking, I want to define how to beat this game with a bowls of water, because why not, dude? Like, it's challenging creatively, and it's...
If you are doing something like this, or have interest in doing something like this, and you're not sure how to get started, I've created a Discord server called the Offbeat Fugue State, also linked down below, where you can run down and join and talk about, programming aspects. You can talk about musical aspects. You can talk about gaming aspects. And the idea is that not just amassing musicians or not just amassing programmers, but getting everyone from each walk of this new budding genre to come together and improve it. And there are many, many places for you to share the content that you're making, or even start engaging with how to make this content. It can be accessible for everybody if we're all willing to work towards it. I want to say thank you again to Anna Ellsworth, CZR, and Sergeant Taco for taking the time to share your experiences with me. I can't wait to see what you guys do next. I'm Nolan the Composer, looking for the music in everything.